Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Humans and the Horror of the Fulcrum, written by SlowAD 2584. The pirate lurker ship sat quietly, scanning passing cargo ships near a galactic jump gate, but effectively cloaked. Scan complete, Captain. Major Krieger freighter design, registry name Big Yellow. Always megatons of goods and colony stores on those, boss. My venom fangs are watering. Are we a go? The pirate captain scratched his dreadlocks, an uneasy feeling creeping up his endoscales. Big Yellow, you say? Well, that's a rather informal, rather earthly name. Scan for crew bioscience, looking for human classification. I believe that freight megacore classifies them as value deckhands. The cobra-headed centipede gave a side-dictating glance at his captain's uncharacteristic uneasiness and ran the scan. Looks to be 2 humans on the crew cap, a deckhand Cole and a deckhand Bob, on the life raft emergency master roster. Only 2 out of a crew of 30,000. That should be no problem. We are a no-go on this one. It's goes in peace, no doubt about it. The snake engineer hissed as it smacked its impaled forearms on the console. Hey, why, Cap? Why do you always pass when there are one of these humans on board? Even it's only a few. What could they possibly be like or do to warrant such avoidance? Now I just need to know. In a word, kid, it would be Fulcrum. And that in their tool mastery eye, everything can be one. Come on, let's go cool off in the cantina, and we can talk about the time I was a prisoner with a human, back in the Mantaloid invasion. Whoa, boss, I had no idea you were ancient. Man, that just made the first round on you. Let's go. We were in the skirmish back then. I don't even recall the battle, or the reasons behind it, but I was a merc for one side. The human was a merc for the other side. We had shot each other's ships to scrap, each of us sputtering on no fuel, left to throw nasty jokes and insults at each other over the comms as we slowly lost power. The human was actually quite witty and funny, and looking back at it. But then, all of a sudden, we were both tractor-beamed into what we later knew to be a scrapper-grinder pit scavenger for the Mantaloid leading edge of the invasion fleet. Our ships were grabbed, stripped for parts, and we were both thrown into chains and tossed into a flaying fun room those fracking monsters have. I knew that we were doomed in for a horrific, bloody, drawn-out death. The human, who was rather chunky, broad-shouldered and densely muscled, with a scruffy braided yellow beard, didn't look too concerned for some reason, and was looking around sharply, as if taking in every object in the room. The captain paused, as if to gather his thoughts, taking a huge drink. So, you actually spent some time in the room with one. Wow. Did he attack you right away? Kid asked, already deeply enraptured in the captain's story. Nah. We were cool with each other at that time. Some sort of common brotherhood in battle thing that I can only admire. He also saw that I seemed to know more about our situation than he did. So he nodded with that little up-chin nod they do to equals and asked, So, how bad is this? I nervously explained that this was very, very bad. How the Mantaloids were cruel, alien, sadistic. How their version of fun was to cut and peel and spread apart prisoners' insides to watch the insides wriggle as we scream in agony. And their art is to make such horrors last for weeks, months before the prisoner dies. Kid paused, frozen in his species' body language of horror. By the Dark Star, I had heard of those monsters. Whatever happened to all of them? He asked as the captain tilted towards him in a knowing look. Oh, of course, you and the human escaped somehow, and word spread, so, hey, you were actually part of that legend. Incredibly cool, Cap. The captain nodded. Yep. So, after I explained what we were in for, the human never got really alarmed or scared, just nodded and said to himself, "Okay, so it's that bad," as he made little nods with his thick neck. But just then a mantaloid flew open the cell door, and they shoved in aggressively to inspect their new toys. As they stretched the prisoner limbs out, tearing at their clothes, removing pocket items and jewelry from us, the human stood there, his eyes taking close, intense stares at the mantle's alien form, the elbow joints, the hip joints, the head attachments to the thorax. The gaze was intense and oddly, coldly critical, as if studying their bodies for the test they didn't really care for. It was very off-putting, making the mantaloid stripping him pause and back away in unspecified alarm. It was so creepy, that studious look, that it alarmed even me as well. I would dearly not want to ever be under the gaze myself. Never ever, kid, especially after what happened later. Kid sat quietly, enraptured by his captain's every word. After they left, backing away from the human's intense stare, the human stood up and started tugging on his chains. "How many on board, do you think?" he asked me quietly. I informed him it was typical, just 3 that we saw, but couldn't be certain. He nodded and then grabbed the chain that ran from his neck to the loop from the deck plate. He threaded his elbows around the chain in front of him, and then spun to have the chain wrapper over his hip, and he pulled tight, with his legs still slightly in a squat. As he took a few deep breaths, I asked him what he was doing, or hoped to accomplish. He said, "Gotta line the whole chain up," as he said, and made a face as he strained to stand up fully. There was a ting as he sharply hopped on his feet, holding up the broken chain with that grim smile. "To find the weakest link." Kid slapped a talon on the table. "No, is that why you line everyone up to always find the thief?" The drunken captain nodded wisely. "Oh, damn right. I learned a ton of important lessons that day." So he moved around the cell, picking up a pipe and a block of ferro resin. He came over to me to break my chain. I shook my head, stating that I'm not quite as strong as he apparently was. He shook his head and said, "You don't need to be very strong if you've got the angle," as he jammed a pipe under the chain flooring. "And leverage," as he pulled on the pipe, but my anchor held strong. The human shook his head and grinned, or feeding that, a handy Fulcrum, where he put a ferro resin block under the bar. By this time, Seesaw pushed the pipe to lever the angle up. It tore smoothly out. The human looked at me and actually grinned, as if he was having fun or something. Kid blinked in surprise. "But you were still locked in its cell. How were you going to get out?" he asked with a bated breath as his alien form could muster. "That's exactly what I asked him, well, now what are we going to do?" And kid, I can say this with a clear conscience, I felt shivers down my spines when the grin left his eyes, and he said honestly, flatly, "Well, when they came back in, I could just kill them all." Yeah, yikes, I couldn't yet see how, but I tell you, I believed him. He then asked me, killing is bad in galactic citizenship, but I feel under the circumstances that I assured him that it was all well within galactic law. He then asked me, if we got free, could I fly the ship to Galactic Hub Station? I nodded. And with that he nodded, and stood back in his chained-up spot when he stared at the cell gate jangling. As the mantaloids entered, with a wicked glee in their eyes, holding many sharp and jagged torture devices, the human just surged into the 3 with his entire bulk. Not a care at all for the sharp blades and spikes that inevitably stabbed him in the process. He shoved the central alien hard to the cell gate, as his 2 arms whipped out to the sides almost too fast to see, and grabbed the other 2 bugs just under their chins and a solid closed fist around their narrow throats. As their torture implements flailed around in their panicked alarm all over the human's arms, chest, and face, he grimly lowered his chin to protect his throat. then with each closed fist began to tilt his thumb forward, and with a sickening creaking pop, both of the edge flew completely off, and they fell instantly dead. The third Mantaloid, keening in terror, was scrambling to pull his sidearm out to aim it at the wild man going berserk on them. But the bloody human surged in and full body pressed the bug against the gate, as he grimly held the bug's weapon off to the side, while his other hand hooked her behind the necks, apparently. Red Bull can diameter, stupid bugs, it's never the monster you know, as his hand closed tight, fully encircling and tilting backwards, the bug already going into shock. It's the monster you didn't know that gets you, and as a wise man once said, all it takes is just one bad day. Honestly, kid, I've never seen anything so terrifying and simultaneously metal in my entire life. When it was all over, the human, badly cut up, began ripping rags to make bandages for his many cuts and punctures. I was amazed he was still functional, and stated as such. But, see, he grinned and shook his head. See, not so bad, as many of his fine cuts had already scabbed over and stopped bleeding. As we searched the bodies for the key to the cell door, it appeared to be bio-locked, needing a living crewmate to unlock. The sidearm, too. Oops. The human didn't mind and began explaining angles and fulcrums, how everything has a best-worst angle of incidence, and everything, literally everything, is a fulcrum. As he tore the cell door off by inches, the blast door securing the command deck, the console cabinet securing the flight controls, I got a first-hand view of the human's rightly deserved masterful tool use. Give a human a sturdy strut, spar, and a fulcrum to place it on, and a human can indeed disassemble the world. By this point, the captain was done for the day and promptly passed out right there on his favorite cantina stool. As crewmate Kid returned to his cabin, he was researching humans on the Galactic Pirate and Anti-Pirate Metanet. He was equally impressed, amazed, and horrified. They certainly didn't look to be all of this at first glance, that was for sure. He then looked up the Mantaloid extinction with its typically unclear cause, but obviously it was the humans, and raised his eyebrow ridges in surprise. Even less time than the Dragon Cat extinction. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.